The intersection of music and politics is rife within the current form of the Republican Party. They just don't know it. Take, for example, the man they propped up, Donald Trump, and his playing of Creedence Clearwater Revival's Fortunate Son. The MAGA base's reaction to hearing this is the epitome of a vibes-based approach. Why exactly? Because the sheer irony of playing a protest song that calls out the rich who evaded being drafted and fighting in Vietnam, which Donald Trump is the embodiment of, is mind-blowing. The lead singer and founder of Creedence Clearwater Revival, John Fogerty, tells the story of writing Fortunate Son, which came out in 1969.
3 months ago, the 1st Air Cavalry Division shipped out from Charleston, South Carolina. Young men trained in a new concept of war. Proud, sure of themselves, but still to be tested in battle. They were destined for the high country of central Vietnam.
The Vietnam War would be prolonged, distastefully spanning nearly 2 decades.
What's that?
Where is it?
We can't reach those big guns, and they just keep dropping in. There's nothing you can do. It's like being a big bullseye on top of a hill, and you're just sitting there waiting. You can't be safe. You can be lucky. That's it.
You can't be safe. You can be lucky.
And we were walking into this village when you can hear what happened.
The realities of war, minus the fog.
The Marines have burned this old couple's cottage because fire was coming from here.
In August, as the war was escalating,
Come this way.
Morley Safer documented Marines destroying homes in Cam Nay.
150 homes were leveled in retaliation for a burst of gunfire.
Safer's report painted a new kind of picture, an ugly, uncensored one.
There were 16 wounded men on the ground.
The reels kept coming.
But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
Stuff landing all over, bouncing off you, and you get just as scared every time. And it gets worse. The closer they get, the more they throw. The more you get scared. When you get up, it's a wonderful feeling just to be alive, to be able to walk around after one of those.
If I live 100 years, I'll just never, ever be able to tell the story the way it really happened.
It was a war that led to American citizens rigorously and loudly using their voices in the form of protest. As captured by the Associated Press in 1965, the crowds were massive. As the draft loomed, there was a notable absence. Affluent white members of society, like the current president of the United States, Donald John Trump.
2 doctors from Queens, New York, helped the president dodge the Vietnam War in 1968.
Dr. Larry Bronstein was a podiatrist who rented a medical office from the president's father, Fred Trump Sr. Bronstein's daughter says that her father diagnosed Trump with bone spurs as a favor to Fred so that he wouldn't have to go fight.
Dr. Bronstein worked in a building owned by Fred Trump, the president's father. Via the Times, the podiatrist, Dr. Larry Bronstein, died in 2007, but his daughters say their father often told the story of coming to the aid of a young Mr. Trump during the Vietnam War as a favor to his father. To be clear, there were various ways of avoiding enlistment, as History.com outlines: enlisting in another branch of the military, registering as a conscientious objector, getting married and having children, attending college, claiming a medical condition, burning your draft card, and fleeing the country. But what irked Fogerty the most? The wealthy's ability to simply avoid it at all costs.
As you know, the heavyweight champion of the world has just made his decision. He has rejected induction into the United States military forces.
In 1966, Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight champion of the world, was banned from boxing in the United States after he refused as a conscientious objector to serve in the army.
Boxing is nothing like going to war with machine guns, bazookas, hand grenades, bomber airplanes. My intention is to box to win a clean fight. But in war, The intention is to kill, and continue killing innocent people.
Well, predominantly the wealthy Caucasians. Thus, Fogarty, a veteran, drew inspiration from what he saw and experienced.
I just tell you that most young people in the late 60s were against the Vietnam War. And also there was a draft, which meant that many of the young men were going to be conscripted into the military, perhaps against their will. But I was drafted, and at some point you stop kicking and screaming and, you do your duty. And you're starting to notice, let's say, well-heeled parents getting their kids out of that situation. I didn't know anybody like that. And so when we call them draft dodgers. I was a little ambivalent about all of that, but when you specifically see some senator plucking his son out of the way of the draft, because his doctor wrote him an excuse and called it old bone spurs or something like that.
Specifically one, as he says, well-heeled kid who avoided being drafted, a family member of former President Dwight D. Eisenhower. In a 1969 Rolling Stone interview, Fogarty stated, "Julie Nixon was hanging around with David Eisenhower, and you just had the feeling that none of these people were going to be involved with the war. In 1969, the majority of the country thought morale was great among the troops, and like 80% of them were in favor of the war. But to some of us who were watching closely, we just knew we were headed for trouble." David Eisenhower, the grandson of Dwight, would marry Julie Nixon, President-elect Richard Nixon's daughter. It would be labeled a lavish ceremony. Fogarty would go on to state in the interview, "The song speaks more to the unfairness of class than war itself. It's the old saying about rich men making war and poor men having to fight them." Fogarty toyed with the idea of writing the track, which railed against the draft system's injustice, which, albeit ensured families of politicians received preferential treatment. Fogarty himself was a vet, but watching the glorification of the wedding galvanized his furious indignation, wrote Dan Inev of the Financial Times. From Fogarty himself, you had the feeling that none of these people were going to be too involved with the war. When the pen touched paper, Fortunate Son came about, and it took Fogarty only 20 minutes.
There's a sense of fairness about this that really upset me. And so I wrote that spurred on my motivation, you might say, to write the song.
And yet what continues to get me to this day is this. As written by Paul Sexton, Fortunate Son has continued to be a clarion call for social justice, but at the same time, it has been repeatedly misinterpreted. For example, the song's theme of privilege among those born silver spoon in hand who were able to leave the fighting to others was misappropriated by Donald Trump's presidential campaign team. This led to Fogarty sending a letter to the Trump team in October of 2020. "I object to the president using my song, Fortunate Son, in any way for his campaign. He is using my words and my voice to portray a message that I do not endorse. Therefore, I am issuing a cease and desist order." I wrote the song because, as a veteran, I was disgusted that some people were allowed to be excluded from serving our country because they had access to political and financial privilege. I also wrote about wealthy people not paying their fair share of taxes. Mr. Trump is a prime example of both of these issues. The fact that Mr. Trump also fans the flames of hatred, racism, and fear while rewriting recent history is even more reason to be troubled by his use of my song. Importantly, drummer Doug Clifford would state of the track, "It isn't really an anti-war song, it's about class." Hey, I appreciate you watching. Now, if you can, please do become a channel member by going to youtube.com/TYTsports and clicking the join button. If that's too much for you, you can just go to tyt.com/join to become a member. It helps all of us out here at the Young Turks and keeps our network afloat. In addition, you could follow me on my socials on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Appreciate the love. Have a great day.